The Austrian father, accused of holding his daughter captive and raping her thousands of times over 2 decades, has been sentenced to life in prison. On Thursday, a jury convicted Josef Fritzl of all charges against him, including incest and murder.
On 28 August 1984, in Amstetten, Austria, 18-year-old Elisabeth Fritzl was in the basement of her family home, helping her father, Josef Fritzl, carry a heavy door into place. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary household, part of ongoing work in the property they shared. Nothing about the task suggested that it would mark the beginning of 24-year captivity. Unbeknownst to Elisabeth, the basement had been extensively modified by her father over a period of years. Behind the familiar structure of the house, Fritzl had constructed a concealed underground chamber, hidden through reinforced walls, locked passageways, and concealed access points that connected multiple basement rooms. The modifications had been disguised through legal building permits and superficial inspections, allowing the hidden space to remain undetected. Once Elisabeth assisted in positioning the door, Fritzl secured it in place. In that moment, the final physical barrier to the concealed chamber was completed. He then pressed an ether-soaked cloth against her face. Elisabeth lost consciousness and was carried into the hidden cellar beneath the house. The chamber itself had been carefully designed to function as a long-term prison. It contained reinforced sections, limited living space, and controlled access through multiple locked doors. The structure was positioned so that reaching it required passing through several layers of security within the basement, making discovery extremely unlikely. After Elisabeth's disappearance, her mother, Rosemarie Fritzl, reported her missing to the authorities. Investigations began, but within weeks, Josef Fritzl introduced a written letter, allegedly from Elisabeth. The letter claimed she had left voluntarily and was staying with friends, later suggesting she had joined a cult. Fritzl reinforced this narrative during interactions with investigators, further directing suspicion away from himself. The combination of the forged letters, false explanations, and Elisabeth's sudden disappearance allowed the case to stagnate. Without evidence of abduction, authorities accepted the possibility that she had left on her own. The hidden cellar remained undiscovered, and Elisabeth remained imprisoned beneath the home where she had grown up. Following her imprisonment on 28 August 1984, life for Elisabeth Fritzl inside the concealed cellar was defined by total isolation and continuous abuse. Over the course of the next 24 years, Josef Fritzl repeatedly raped and sexually assaulted his daughter inside the underground chamber, maintaining complete control over her environment and movement. As a result of this prolonged captivity, Elisabeth gave birth to 7 children. One of the newborns died shortly after birth and was later cremated by Josef Fritzl. The remaining 6 children survived infancy under extreme and restricted conditions. 3 of the children were kept inside the cellar with Elisabeth. They grew up entirely underground, without exposure to normal social or environmental conditions. The other 3 children were taken by Fritzl from the cellar and placed in the family home above. He presented them to his wife, Rosemarie Fritzl, and authorities as abandoned infants left by Elisabeth, convincing them that she had left the children behind. These children were raised by Josef and Rosemarie Fritzl in the household upstairs, while their biological mother remained imprisoned beneath the same roof. Social service authorities accepted the explanations provided by Fritzl and approved the arrangements, unaware of the true circumstances. Inside the cellar, Elisabeth attempted to create some sense of structure for the children who remained with her. She taught them basic reading and writing skills, despite extremely limited resources and confinement. The living conditions remained harsh, with restricted space, limited ventilation, and dependence entirely on what Fritzl provided. In the mid-1990s, the underground chamber was physically expanded. After repeated requests from Elisabeth, Fritzl allowed the enlargement of the cellar space. Elisabeth and the children were forced to participate in digging out additional soil using their hands, increasing the size of the prison from approximately 35 to 55 square meters. Throughout the years of captivity, Fritzl used threats to maintain psychological control over Elisabeth and her children. He warned them that any attempt to escape would result in severe punishment, including claims of electrocution or gas exposure, reinforcing fear and submission. Despite these conditions, the underground family continued to survive in isolation, with the outside world completely unaware that Elisabeth and her children were living beneath the house. Before her imprisonment, Elisabeth Fritzl lived with her family in Amstetten, Lower Austria, as the daughter of Josef Fritzl and Rosemarie Fritzl. Born on 6 April 1966, she grew up in a household that later became central to one of the most extensive captivity cases in modern criminal history. According to later investigations, Elisabeth's abuse began years before her disappearance. Josef Fritzl reportedly began sexually abusing her in 1977 when she was approximately 11 years old. These early abuses formed the background to the events that would eventually lead to her confinement. As a teenager, Elisabeth attempted to build independence. After completing compulsory education, she began training as a waitress. In January 1983, she ran away from home and stayed in Vienna with a friend from work. However, she was located by police within 3 weeks and returned to her family home in Amstetten. Despite this setback, she continued her training and eventually completed it in mid-1984. She was also offered a job opportunity in Linz, which represented a potential path toward independence outside her family environment. These developments occurred alongside increasing control and manipulation within her household. The contrast between her attempts to build a normal adult life and the restrictions imposed by her father highlights the progression of her circumstances leading up to 1984. By the time of her disappearance, Elisabeth had already experienced years of abuse and control within the family structure, setting the stage for the events that followed. Josef Fritzl, born 9 April 1935, Amstetten, Lower Austria. To the outside world, he maintained the appearance of a conventional family man and businessman. He married Rosemarie Fritzl in 1956, and together they had several children, including Elisabeth Fritzl. Professionally, Fritzl worked in various technical and commercial roles, including employment at voestalpine in Linz, and later as a technical equipment salesman. He also managed property interests, including apartment buildings and rental properties in Amstetten. His public life contrasted sharply with the private reality later revealed after his arrest. He was viewed as a stable figure within his community, managing business activities and maintaining family responsibilities. However, later testimony and investigations revealed a deeply disturbing background that included long-term abusive behavior within his household. While outwardly presenting himself as a functioning member of society, he was simultaneously building and maintaining a hidden environment beneath his home. The contradiction between his public identity and private actions became a central focus of the investigation after 2008, when the extent of his crimes was finally uncovered. His role as both father and captor defined the case and shaped its global notoriety. Before the events of 1984, Josef Fritzl already had a documented criminal history. In 1967, he was convicted of rape after breaking into a nurse's home in Linz and assaulting her under threat of violence. He served a prison sentence of 18 months, with 12 months spent incarcerated. Additional reports from the same period linked him to attempted sexual assault and indecent exposure, establishing a pattern of sexual violence prior to the later crimes against his daughter. Under Austrian law, his criminal record was later expunged after a set period of time. This legal removal meant that decades later, when authorities evaluated his suitability in family-related matters, his prior conviction was not detected. Following his release and return to civilian life, Fritzl resumed normal employment and family life. However, investigators later examined whether he may have been connected to other violent crimes, including several unsolved murders in Austria. Despite initial suspicion after his arrest in 2008, there was insufficient evidence to charge him in relation to these cases. The investigations did, however, contribute to a broader reassessment of his history and behavioral patterns. These earlier incidents now form part of the context used to understand how his later crimes were able to escalate over time without intervention. The concealment of Elisabeth Fritzl's imprisonment depended on a combination of deception, isolation, and systemic oversight. After her disappearance in 1984, Josef Fritzl created a false narrative suggesting that she had voluntarily left home. He presented a written letter, allegedly from Elisabeth, stating she had chosen to leave, and later implying she had joined a cult. These letters were used to mislead investigators and prevent deeper scrutiny into her disappearance. Over the following years, Fritzl maintained this narrative consistently. Whenever questioned, he repeated explanations supporting the idea that she had left willingly. This helped close the initial investigation without revealing inconsistencies. Despite regular visits, officials did not detect the existence of the hidden cellar or the true origin of the children being raised above ground. Neighbors, tenants, and visitors to the property also reported nothing that directly exposed the hidden cellar. The physical structure of the basement, combined with multiple locked barriers and concealed access points, prevented discovery despite regular access to parts of the house. Together, these factors allowed the imprisonment to continue for nearly 24 years without detection. In April 2008, the situation began to unravel when Elisabeth's eldest daughter, Kirsten, became critically ill inside the cellar. She lost consciousness and developed severe health complications that required urgent medical attention. Facing a medical emergency, Josef Fritzl agreed to bring Kirsten to a hospital. For the first time in decades, Elisabeth briefly left the cellar to assist in carrying her daughter outside. She was then forced to return underground shortly afterward. Kirsten was admitted to the Landesklinikum Amstetten hospital in serious condition. Medical staff found her condition unusual and difficult to explain, particularly given the limited background information provided by Fritzl. He claimed that Elisabeth had left the family years earlier and that Kirsten's history was unclear. As doctors raised concerns, inconsistencies in Fritzl's explanations became more apparent. Authorities were alerted, and police launched a renewed investigation into the long-standing missing persons case. Public appeals were issued, requesting information about Elisabeth Fritzl. At the same time, Fritzl continued to insist that she had joined a cult and provided letters that were presented as evidence of her voluntary disappearance. However, investigators began to question the authenticity of these documents and the plausibility of his story. The combination of Kirsten's medical condition and Fritzl's inconsistent explanations marked the beginning of the collapse of his long-maintained deception. As Kirsten remained hospitalized, pressure increased on Josef Fritzl to clarify Elisabeth's whereabouts. Elisabeth herself pleaded to visit her daughter in the hospital, further intensifying the situation inside the household. Eventually, Fritzl agreed to release Elisabeth, along with two of her sons, Stefan and Felix, from the cellar. They were brought upstairs into the main house for the first time in many years, while Fritzl continued to maintain his fabricated narrative. Later that day, Fritzl and Elisabeth went to the hospital where Kirsten was being treated. Police, already suspicious of inconsistencies in the case, received a tip-off that led them to detain both Fritzl and Elisabeth for questioning. During initial interviews, Elisabeth provided limited information. However, after being assured that she would never have to face her father again, she disclosed the full extent of her 24-year captivity. Following her statement, investigators entered the concealed cellar beneath the Fritzl home. They documented the underground chamber and confirmed the existence of a long-term living space consistent with Elisabeth's testimony. Physical evidence supported her account, and DNA testing later confirmed that Josef Fritzl was the biological father of her children. The scale of the discovery immediately transformed the case into a major international investigation. Josef Fritzl was arrested on multiple charges, including rape, false imprisonment, incest, and murder by negligence. Following his arrest, the investigation into Josef Fritzl expanded rapidly. Elisabeth Fritzl provided videotaped testimony describing years of confinement, abuse, and forced labor within the underground cellar. Forensic examinations and DNA testing confirmed the biological relationship between Fritzl and the children born during captivity. These findings formed a central part of the prosecution's case. Fritzl was charged with multiple offenses, including rape, incest, kidnapping, false imprisonment, slavery, coercion, and murder by negligence in relation to the death of one of the infants shortly after birth. During psychiatric evaluations, Fritzl attempted to justify his actions, offering explanations that were rejected by investigators and experts. He also claimed that parts of his behavior were influenced by his upbringing and personal beliefs. Psychiatric assessments diagnosed him with severe personality disorders, concluding that he required long-term psychiatric treatment. The trial began in March 2009. Over the course of proceedings, extensive evidence was presented, including Elisabeth's testimony, forensic findings, and witness statements. On the third day of trial, Fritzl changed his plea and admitted guilt to multiple charges. He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. The court ordered that he remain in a secure psychiatric facility due to the severity of his crimes and assessed risk factors. Following the trial, Josef Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was incarcerated in a high-security psychiatric facility where he remains under supervision. The legal outcome marked the conclusion of one of the most disturbing captivity cases in modern criminal history. After their rescue, Elisabeth and her surviving children underwent extensive medical and psychological treatment. They were initially placed in protective care and provided with support to adjust to life outside confinement after 24 years underground. The effects of long-term captivity were significant. Medical reports indicated both physical and psychological trauma among the family members, requiring ongoing rehabilitation and therapy. Adjustment to natural light, open space, and normal social environments was a gradual process. Over time, Elisabeth and her children began rebuilding their lives in privacy under new identities. Authorities took measures to protect their anonymity and ensure their safety from public exposure. The case also led to scrutiny of institutional failures that allowed the abuse to remain undetected for decades. It became a widely studied example of prolonged domestic captivity and systemic oversight. In later years, reports indicated that Fritzl's health deteriorated while in custody. Discussions also continued regarding his legal status and potential future placement within the prison system. The Fritzl case remains one of the most notorious examples of hidden abuse in modern criminal history, highlighting how long-term manipulation and isolation can exist undetected even within ordinary surroundings.